Hey, how you doing?
Good, how are you? Can you hear me
Doing
now?
all right. I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect.
Perfect.
You're going to share slides, you said, right?
Yes, I tried it and it worked, and I'm just letting people to come in because I put a admin request, so they have to request.
Oh, gotcha.
Switch now. More. I need settings.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Sorry I'm late, gang.
You're right on time.
Wow. That's one of those, if you're not 5 minutes early, you're late kind of things. My printer got black shit all over my hands too. Sorry, pardon my French.
I'm just letting everyone to come in or join. Let me do that. Sign. Thank you everyone for joining, and I'm so excited to see everyone here. So we have Michelle here. I'm working, so sorry about this background noise. There's construction going on. So hopefully you can hear me well. So we will start in a few minutes. Okay. Great. We'll give them 2 more minutes. 11:05 can start. Okay. So I'm just letting the people come in from the waiting room. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. 1 more minute. Can you guys see the screen, the slideshow?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So put this on the side. Perfect. Right, we can start our meeting. Thank you for joining our first FCC Task Force educational session. Our agenda today is that first we will go over the FCC Task Force, our work and then update, and followed by Ms. Mary Coughlin talk. And then we have a family partners panel discussion. And we end with our question and answer session. So please feel free to chat in with any questions you might have. And we have our task force mentors moderating the chat. Briefly, I want to introduce myself. I am Malati Balasundaram. I'm one of the neonatologists from California. And I'm a family-centered care committee chair at El Camino Health, and which is a community level 3 NICU. I'm passionate about providing the FCC care in my local NICU and also expanding the FCC care into other NICUs. That's why I just started having this conversation with my colleague and my mentors, and I received tremendous help and support to build this task force. And thank you, everyone. And so with that, I will just move on and talk about our development. So we did so far we started the task force in November 2021. In 5 months time period, what we achieved, we partnered with the American Academy of Pediatrics with trainees and early career neonatologists, executive council, and we recruited trainees and neonatologists and nurses and advanced practice providers who are passionate about providing FCC in their unit via the survey link. Also, we collaborated with the 13 family partners that you are going to hear from them in a few minutes. So we formed 5 small cohort groups and connected with the units that already have an FCC program. So currently we have over 50 members, and actually in the past week we had 10 more members. So it's growing steadily, so which is great. So we have 32 centers being part of the small cohort groups, and so from 20 states and 1 international center. So broad aims of this task force are to create networking opportunities for NICUs interested in family-centered care, to facilitate the creation of FCC committees and family partnership councils at local hospitals around the country and around the world, to educate on the importance of family integration in the NICU, to foster the benchmarking on FCC measures between centers, which is in phase 3. So here we have our co-chairs, myself and Colby Day, and I'm so excited to work with Colby. And when I shared my vision of expanding this FCC, she enthusiastically supported that vision, and she's passionate about providing the FCC care in her NICU too. So we have partnered with this task force, and we hope to collaborate with every one of you to include the families in our neonatology. So, and this slide and then following slide, it shows our 13 family partners in our task force. So Jennifer, Canvasser, and Lelis, Vernon, and Necole, and Keira, Marybeth, and Molly. And we recruited diverse family partners and from different organizations, local NICU. So we wanted to have a representative from different level. And the next slide shows Kimberly and Mike, Nicholas, and Katherine, Megan, Michelle, and Christy. So we have 13 partners. We are collaborating with them actively. They are providing feedback. And so I learned so much working with them in the past 5 months, and I will share my learning point with you all at the end of my talk. And then we have a planning committee mentors and Dr. Dashi Sivakumar and Dr. Bob White and Dr. Joy Brown and Dr. Mike Dunn and Dr. Timothy Palmer. So they are our mentors who are helping us to plan the educational session and moderating the session as well. And today, Dr. White and Dr. Palmer will be moderating the chat session. So feel free to chat in any questions you have so we can have a discussion. And so, as I mentioned earlier, so we have a small group to help them to build the local NICU FCC committees and Family Partnership Council. So Carrie and Jessica is our group 1 lead, and Dashi and Bargabi and Katherine is the group 2 leaders. Colby and Daphna is a group 3 leader. So we have 6 to 7 centers in each group. And Jessica and Tim is leading the group 4, and group 5, myself and Dr. White, Bob and Keira, Michelle are the part of the group 5 leaders. So the phase 3, we are trying to benchmark the FCC measures. So we recruited a QI mentors as well. So they are guiding us through the process of QI work. So Dr. Wendy Timson and Dr. Jeff Mayers and Dr. Henry Lee is our QI mentors. So we invited several faculty speakers and so to expand the FCC. So today, Mary Coughlin is going to give her fantastic talk, and I learned, I listened to her talk in a can, and it was great, and I can't wait to hear her talk in a few minutes. And Dr. Smith and Dr. Pineda, Bobby Pineda, and Dr. Meg Parker and Dr. Prophet, and they are going to be our speaker in the future webinars. So we have a separate group working on creating an FCC newsletter. So that's the group we are planning to deliver that newsletter monthly and focusing on FCC publications with the commentary and then pearls from the family partner section. We wanted to highlight some of the FCC work done in the local NICU. So if you have your NICU is doing fantastic work in family engagement, please share with us. So we wanted to highlight all those things in our newsletter and share our work so other units can learn from us. So this is the lesson I learned from collaborating with the family partners. So we started with our task force with naming the parent advisors. And from Lelis, I just learned this, moving from parent advisors to family partners, to include families inclusive of different types of caregivers, so including grandparents, aunts, uncles, and older siblings, and surrogates and LGBTQ positive couples. And also we don't want it to be a passive, providing us just a passive voice advising. So we wanted to have a partnering with them, and so equal weight and role as a team members. So we changed from parent advisor to family partners. And then next one is when we are working on this flyer for this today's talk, and came up as a NICU graduate, and we wanted to be more inclusive of bereaved families. So to include the child and children who are no longer physically here with us, but who continue to bring profound joy, influence, and meaning to their parents' lives every day. So we changed that to NICU children or child. And also from Molly, so we got this from calling the NICU families and partners, don't call them visitors, they are the essential caregivers. So these, with the working with them, I just learned these 3 language. You have to use the appropriate language when we are providing the family-centered care in the NICU. So, and I wanted to thank everyone in this task force, and especially with Daphna for creating this logo, and which is amazing. Hope everyone agree with this. It's so beautiful. And I'm also one of the 8th grader created the flyer. So Colby and I recruited her already, so she is going to make the flyer during our educational session. So our task force is from the 8th grader to the different levels. So we have a diverse task force members. And thank you everyone for joining the session. I will just hand over to Colby to talk about our demographics.
Hi everyone. We had to recruit an 8th grader because we are not technologically competent enough probably to create a nice looking flyer. So she did a great job. I'm Colby Day. I'm a neonatologist at the University of Rochester in New York. I am very interested in incorporating family-centered care into neonatology, both as a clinical goal, but also as a goal in quality improvement. And so I'm really excited to work with everyone on this task force. I currently work in an academic level 4 hospital, and I'm very lucky to work in a NICU that embraces family-centered care at all levels. Currently in my unit, we're focused on integrating families into the development of a small baby unit and bolstering our current programs to support families of infants in the NICU. And it sounds like there are a lot of other individuals in this task force that are doing amazing work for families. And so I'm excited to hear about that over the next year. But enough about me. I wanted to tell you about the centers that are actually involved in this task force. And this is just some quick information that we obtained from a survey of participating centers. And I'll warn you that all of the numbers do not necessarily add up to 33, since some individuals work in multiple units. But for a basic overview of our task force, about 64% of our members are working in level 3 NICUs, and 36% report that they're in level 4. And the majority of our members are working in units that range from 11 to 40 beds, namely about 35%, 41 to 60 beds, or 61 to 90 beds. Next slide. We also looked at what the composition is of staff in the units. So 55% of our task force members are reporting having trainees in their unit, and 84% are reporting having advanced practice providers in their unit, some with nurse practitioners, some with physician assistants, and some with a combination. We also have 52% of our members that are working in a unit with less than 10 neonatologists, with the next largest buckets being 11 to 15 and 21 to 30 neonatologists. Next slide. And then we also asked our units where they stand currently in terms of formal family-centered care committees within their own NICU, and also family advisory councils, which may be called other things in different places, like family partnership councils, but whether those exist in their hospitals currently. And we had about 55% of our members with family-centered care committees in their unit already, and 45% with a family advisory council. And on our next slide, we have all of our centers listed. So these are our 32 national centers and our 1 international center that are participating in the task force. We would love to make this list longer. So I know that Dr. Palmer has already posted once our feedback form that you can fill out at the end of this webinar. And there are 2 questions on that. It's very brief, but ask whether you are interested in being part of the task force, and whether you are interested in being a part of the small cohort groups that are working specifically on improving family-centered care in their units.
Colby,
And then the next,
we'll post it again later in the talk.
Thank you, yes. Now, the next phase of our initiative is the program initiation phase. And so during this, we're hoping to work on our first 3 main aims that we went over at the beginning, namely to create networking opportunities for NICUs that are interested in family-centered care, to educate on the importance of family integration in the NICU, and to facilitate the creation of these family-centered care committees and family partnership councils at hospitals, really not only around the country, but around the world, since we are technically international at this point, which is fantastic. The next slide, I believe, is talking through our next educational program. So we will be offering these educational webinars every other month. Today is our first. This is focused on early life adversity in the NICU and our family partner panel. And for every webinar, you'll notice that we have an invited speaker who is an expert in an aspect of family-centered care, and also a family partner presentation or a panel with each of our webinars as well. In July, we'll be learning about why it's important to provide family-centered care in the NICU and how to go about providing it. On our next slide, we'll see in September, we'll learn how to build a family partnership council in your NICU. And in November, we'll focus on mental health for families in the NICU. And then we have some webinars scheduled for the next calendar year as well. So in January of next year, we'll learn about family integrated developmental care. In March, we're going to talk about the transition to home. And in May, we'll discuss family engagement in QI. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Mary Coughlin. So Mary is a global leader in neonatal nursing and has pioneered the concept of trauma-informed developmental care as a biologically relevant paradigm for babies, children, families, and professionals. A seasoned staff nurse, charge nurse, neonatal nurse practitioner, administrator, coach, and mentor, Mary has over 35 years of nursing experience, beginning with her 7 years of active duty in the U.S. Air Force Nurse Corps, and culminating with her current role as president and founder of Caring Essentials Collaborative, an organization committed to transforming the experience of healthcare for babies and families around the globe through a trauma-informed paradigm. Mary is a published author and seminal papers on developmentally supportive care, and she's educated, inspired, and empowered more than 30,000 interdisciplinary clinicians from over 20 countries to transform the experience of healthcare for infants, children, and families in crisis. Mary leads her incredible team at Caring Essentials Collaborative with a bold and ambitious vision to create a kinder, more connected, and compassionate world, one moment at a time. Please join me in welcoming Mary.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and pull up my screen.
Stop sharing.
Did the slides come up okay?
Yes.
All right, awesome sauce. Okay, well, thank you so very much. I'm very honored to be able to present on a topic that is near and dear to my heart, talking about trauma-informed care and the role of the family in mitigating the trauma experience during the NICU stay. My disclosure is that I am the president of Caring Essentials Collaborative, and my learning objectives over these next few minutes is that we're going to just kind of ground ourselves with a definition of family-centered care, describe trauma and trauma-informed care, and then I hope to be able to communicate to you guys the biologic urgency of families in NICU based on our understanding of trauma. I guess just coming out of the gate, just to kind of give you a general definition of family-centered care or patient and family-centered care. It's defined as an approach to planning, delivery, and the evaluation of healthcare grounded in mutually beneficial partnerships among healthcare providers, patients, and families, and emphasizes interactions that promote healing relationships. The idea of family-centered care is not new, and we continue to struggle despite the fact that it's not new. It has its origins back in the 1950s in British children's hospitals, and it became more prominent in the US in the 80s. And it's a combination of different interrelated principles. I mean, everybody has their take and definition on what constitutes family-centered care, but in recent evaluations and publications, we're really starting to get a better understanding of the challenges. And so in talking to you about trauma and trauma-informed care, I'm hoping that will help raise awareness about the urgency to address these challenges and really truly standardize family-centered care. In a recent paper by Sergetson et al., they looked at a lack of unifying metrics. So really, in order to establish family-centered care as a true standard, as something that's really interwoven and connected to positive benefits for everybody, we need to have metrics that are going to really evaluate and demonstrate that we're meeting these goals, and that we're meeting the urgency of providing family-centered care. That, as I alluded to a few minutes ago, that there's a lot of variability in how we operationalize family-centered care practices in NICUs here and abroad. And that there are racial and ethnic and socioeconomic inequities in access to family-centered care in the NICU that I think we really need to be mindful to, as we move forward with this work. In general, I think it's fair to say, and this was quoted by Durjati and his co-authors, that the goals of family-centered care are really about improving infant and family well-being, enhancing the ability of families to provide appropriate developmental care by including them as an integral part of the care team as essential caregivers, and successfully integrating the infant into the family unit over the continuum of the hospitalization so that we have more success for the families and for the baby when they're all at home in the post-discharge period. So with those goals kind of set out there, then I'd like to dive into the trauma aspects of this. What we know is that adversity in childhood is definitely linked to mental and physical health throughout life. And the prevalence of toxic stress in healthcare, pediatric medical trauma, and the huge downstream consequences of disease, suffering, financial costs, social and educational implications really make prevention and early intervention crucial. And for me, unlike the kind of traditional view of trauma-informed care in behavioral health, where it's really guiding how you engage with individuals who have already had a trauma history, with our patient population, it really does become that prevention model. an early intervention approach to care, because when we understand that these adverse experiences are going to derail the developmental trajectory of the individual, when we approach the care through this trauma-informed paradigm, we can actually proactively mitigate the trauma experience and the consequences subsequently that follow. Bessel van der Kolk is a world-renowned psychiatrist and does an exhaustive amount of research and work with trauma victims. And I really appreciate his definition of what trauma is. It's when your reality is not seen or known. And that is what trauma is. And so when I say that, to me, it just really magnifies that the majority of our patients, their reality is not seen or known. Their personal journey through the trauma that they endure because of their life-threatening illness, because of their separation, oftentimes is not appreciated to the magnitude that it needs to be in order to be resolved. The Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration defines trauma using this 3 E's. The E's are an event, experience, and effect. Individual trauma results from an event or a series of events or a set of circumstances that is experienced by the individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning, their mental, physical, social, emotional, and even spiritual well-being. It's that experience piece. It's an individual experience. It doesn't matter what we think about a heel stick or about a tape removal or about a diaper change. It's what that individual is experiencing in that moment that defines whether or not it is traumatic or toxic to their self. And so when we look at, connecting the dots of this trauma to the role of the family, we first have to really get our head wrapped around the fact that maternal separation is the #1 traumatic experience endured by all mammalian species, all newborn mammalian species. When a child is separated from his or her parents under chaotic circumstances, there is a monsoon of stress hormones that start flooding the brain and the body. These hormones are important for navigating stress in the short term. However, in high doses, they can actually derail healthy development and actually become pretty destructive. And it is this exposure to toxic stress that actually culminates with a significant increased risk and vulnerability for a variety of non-communicable diseases that I'll touch upon shortly, as well as a shortened lifespan. And many of our scientific colleagues are really trying to help us better understand the process, kind of this cascade of events. This is a publication from Agarasios back in 2019 that kind of delineates the different stages that the individual is exposed and vulnerable to stress. And that first hit, that yellow bar across the top of the this table here, is talking about their genetic predisposition. And I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with the work that's looked at this transgenerational phenomenon associated with trauma, but it's important for us to understand that. What's the family history? What is their, exposure to the social determinants of health? What is their support network? What are, other types of social situations that may predispose them to exposure to high doses of stress and toxic stress in particular? So you have that predisposition, and then you have the individual's initial exposure to early life stress. Now, I, of course, am relating this to the NICU stay, right? So it's the timing of the exposure. The younger the individual, the more susceptible they are to the derangement that's going to happen as a consequence of this exposure to toxic stress. Although across the entire gestational age continuum, individuals are highly vulnerable. The intensity of it, the duration, is it acute? Is it chronic? Many of our patients are exposed to chronic high doses of toxic stress, which then in the blue box initiates a myriad of allostatic processes that undermine the biological integrity of the individual. And I think, most of us kind of go, first button, HPA axis, all of that makes perfect sense, but really understanding how the disturbance influences immune integrity, brain development, epigenetic processing, sleep and circadian rhythmicity, metabolic disturbances, and even oxidative stress processes that can derail the individual, even down to the mitochondria. There's several really interesting studies that have looked at individuals' exposure to toxic stress during early life and how it can even result in primary mitochondrial failure. So, when you think about this, and you think about some of the presenting challenges that we have as neonatal clinicians to the patients that we're serving, certainly the primary diagnosis is playing a key role, but there's a myriad of other factors behind the scenes that are also derailing the physiologic integrity of this individual. So understanding that exposure to early life stress and childhood trauma leads to disruption in critical phases of perinatal and neonatal brain development, and it goes on, into early childhood, and even adolescents are equally susceptible. There's been just a huge volume of research now that's done by really great minds. I've got a thing for the Italian researchers. I just love all the work that they're doing, really helping us understand the implications of exposure to trauma, particularly to the premature patient population. We've looked at, they've uncovered rather, epigenetic modifications that have derailed serotonin transporter gene functionality that leads to anxiety and depression as young children and adolescents, and oftentimes can go on into adulthood. We see shortened telomeres as a consequence to the chronic stress, the toxic stress that these individuals endure during NICU stay. There was another really great study by Faust-Wylie and her team, and they were correlating epigenetic methylations with brain volumes at term gestational age and developmental milestones at 12 months of age. And there's definitely correlation. We're seeing these individuals are having contracted brain volumes, they're having epigenetic modifications, and also their behavioral development is being impaired. So we're seeing the beginnings of this evolution of derailment, and primarily caused by the myriad of traumatic experiences that these individuals endure, with the leading cause being separation and deprivation from their mother, from their family, from their parents. And so it's really important, at least for me, right, to really be able to see these biological consequences and understand that indeed preterm birth is an early adverse experience characterized by exposure to high levels of stress and the altered buffering effects of maternal care. What we now understand is, it's an is thing, right? Being in the NICU and having a life-threatening illness, you're going to need a myriad of different types of interventions so that we can, keep you alive and help you survive this situation. But if we can ensure that parental presence, that parental comfort and proximity consistently, what these individuals actually are able to do is cultivate resilience. What they learn is that, bad stuff happens in life, but I can get through these challenging times with other, and of course, with other being the ideal gold standard of the parent. So let me just advance my slides. I'm sorry, I know I'm talking quickly. I want to be mindful of the time, and I also get really excited about this subject matter. I think it's really exciting now for us to understand that the American Academy of Pediatrics now is recommending a trauma-informed approach to all child health services. This was part of their clinical report, this graph here, that was published in August of 21, that really, again, just kind of summarizes what we now have uncovered about the exposure of toxic stress in the developing child. So brain connectivity is impacted, there's epigenetic modifications, and immune function is derailed. We know that adversity in childhood is pervasive. Our first discovery of this was with the Adverse Childhood Experience study, and there are many studies to follow have confirmed those original findings. And even in adult survivors of very preterm birth, adult clinicians now are recognizing the importance of, carrying through that entire history of these individuals and being able to make those connections. So, it's not necessarily what your diagnosis is. I mean, that's just one piece of the pie, but understanding what was the social milieu that you were nurtured in, hopefully you were nurtured to some degree, that was either there was a paucity of relationships, or maybe there was, a lot of good relationships, and that can really help us understand which trajectory this individual is going to proceed forward in. So this particular graph here is just really highlighting very current morbidity and mortality information with regard to specifically premature individuals. I know it's a bit of an eye chat, but again, I felt that it was really important for us to get a handle and understand the long-term consequences. So if I'm here saying that trauma-informed approach is a prevention strategy, and the key intervention in providing that is the presence of the family, then it's important for us to understand what will be the ramifications when we don't do that. We already know this is it. The ramifications are a shortened lifespan by at least 20 years. These cohorts here, these health outcomes were looked at in individuals ranging between 18 and 45 years of age. The graph on the right is looking at a cohort of over 6 million individuals, and the Crump paper was also kind of assimilating similar data from a single Nordic nation. And what we find is that the leading cause of death for these individuals spans the bandwidth of non-communicable diseases to include cardiovascular disease, chronic lung disease, metabolic disturbances, and such. But what's not listed on this graph, and what the authors do report, is the most common cause of death, not including it, that's not a non-communicable disease, was suicide and accidents. And so we see the derailment in their healthy developmental trajectory playing out with profound psychopathology that we actually can mitigate by ensuring a more nurturing, relationship-oriented, loving early experience through a very integrated and a very consistent approach to family-centered care. Understanding this, that this is the stress response and all of the things that are impacted when we're experiencing stress, understanding that at any point along the continuum of the stress, when we can insert social support, when we can insert a sense of safety and connectedness, we can actually mitigate the consequences associated with that stress response. And this was a really nice adaptation of the polyvagal theory that was represented in the clinical report by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And so to just, kind of take this down a notch, I find that, when we're looking at the lived experience of the premature individual and the family as well, right? I mean, all human species, when they're overwhelmed with stress, when they're literally freaking out, when they're terrified beyond reason, their entire world just contracts, and it's all about survival. And you'll see this autonomic presentation that should signal to us that they need some type of relational support, that they need that reassurance that they are in a safe space. When we misreading those cues, the individual can just spiral out of control, and the biological sequelae that follow that emotional interpretation of the experience. Who better to be able to read those signs and read those cues than the family, and help be that intermediary between the patient and the healthcare provider. And what an empowering opportunity that is for the family to be able to get that attuned and that connected with their baby, and how empowering that is for them. And when you think about, when I had mentioned at the on the earlier slide about the goals of family-centered care, it's really about empowering and validating the role identity of the family. And so, understanding how the biology kind of moves through the experience of trauma then becomes a tool for us to be able to then recognize how we can mitigate that trauma through the use of social relationships. We know that the antithetical hormone to cortisol, the stress hormone, is oxytocin. And there's been just really great research helping us really understand how activating oxytocin promotes autonomic regulation and a sense of safety and security. And so when we can, again, engage with the family, help them also see the critical role they play, then it's, again, very validating. And I think for us as well, for clinicians that really tend to minimize the importance and the biologic relevance of family-centered care, understanding it, I think, at this level can really, turn the tide. And we can really then recognize that urgency for emotional connectedness has physiologic sequelae. The American Psychiatric Nurses Association has this really cool little catchphrase that all health begins with mental health. And so I want you to think about that. I mean, I don't think a lot of us think enough about infant mental health, but these individuals are having profound, overwhelming emotional responses to the experiences that they must endure as a consequence of their life-threatening illness. And so when we can have that partnership, that consistent partnership with families who are perfectly poised and have the biology to take this on, to really balance out that stress response. And again, in doing that and having their role identity validated, it helps the family as well process and metabolize their own experience of the trauma that they're undergoing in light of their infant's NICU hospitalization. Recognizing that the feelings matter. I think, at least from my perspective as a NICU clinician, it was all about the empirical knowledge and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that that's not important, but I definitely downplayed the importance of feelings and emotions. And, of course, looking back now, I realize that tuning into that, making those kinds of human connections really can be transformational for the individual across, all the different domains of what it is to be human, right? Physically, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. To really recognize the healing power of connection. And that primary connection between parent and infant can literally be transformative, can literally be the secret sauce from a preventative health model. And when we foster that awareness of connection for the patient and for the family and for ourselves, we can actually support, what many folks call post-traumatic growth. We learn that we can actually move beyond the trauma that we bear witness to every day because we are facilitating these very natural and very important relationships between the baby and the family, that we're empowering them to embrace this new role despite the adversity, because we're here to support them through that transition. And when we really can do this right, we can really impact the future in meaningful and measurable ways. And so that's my summarization of why families are so critical in the newborn intensive care unit, because they are the primary intervention that can really mitigate and ameliorate the trauma experience of the infant and the family as well.
Thank you, Mary. That was wonderful. Such a great amount of things to learn. Yeah. What questions do we have for Mary? Feel free to speak up or write things in the chat.
You're welcome.
Mary, this is Bob White.
How are you?
One of the
Hey.
challenges is parents that are there and we really want to get them involved, but they're just so scared. They're afraid they will break their baby. And no matter how much we encourage them, we seem to be unsuccessful sometimes. What strategies would you recommend in that situation?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Thank you very much for that question. And I think certainly kind of in partnership with social worker, in partnership with mental health professionals, we need to really help these parents build a sense of confidence and competence. So I'm a big proponent of mock-up scenarios, right? Really learning how to do some of these little technical things like changing a diaper or repositioning a baby, or even just holding their own baby, using a doll first so they can kind of work out the the tactics of whatever it is that they're being invited to do in a safe situation, and then slowly engaging them to, you know, transition to their baby. It's one of my colleagues uses this really cool phrase, and I think it's absolutely the best. It's working through the hands of the parent. So really helping the parent do these things, and you be, you know, not be the facilitator, but the support instead, if that makes sense. Like, for example, I think of skin to skin and a standing transfer, you know, really being behind that parent literally and helping them move through the steps, and encouraging them, giving them that positive feedback instead of kind of approaching it. What I would traditionally do would be very, you know, instructional, but really in a more mentorship kind of a way, working through their hands. I hope that's helpful. But they have to have mental health services as well. And I think we're a little bit behind the 8 ball in the United States. I know many of my European colleagues are really starting to embrace and have on board psychologists, you know, in the NICU, in the PICU, and we really need to start moving towards that model. I think it's a best practice.
We have one question in the chat. I think we have time to do that one, and then we'll move on to our family panel. But if you have other questions, definitely chat them in, and we can always send messaging out later. But Sarah Swinson asked if you could comment on the difference between family-centered care and family integrated care.
Okay, that's a good question, and I hope I get the answer right. So I think family-centered care is kind of like this overarching paradigm, and as I mentioned at the very beginning, when I was, you know, reviewing the literature as well, there's inconsistency in how people operationalize it. So even though we may use the same words, what it looks like in real life might be quite different. Family integrated care seems a little bit more prescribed, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, they have specific protocols, at least when I think about the model from Canada, you know, that parents sign on, and they'll, you know, a family member will be present X amount of time. There are different competencies that families develop in providing care to their baby during their hospital stay. So it's that type of a thing. So there's more, it feels like this is the word, intentionality in engaging them to be those essential caregivers, with more of a script around it. Not saying that that script is bad, you know, that there's that kind of a piece, versus family-centered seems a little bit more amorphous. And I think that's one of the challenges in the work from Sigurdsson and Profit and those guys, you know, and really saying we need to use a more a Q.I. model around how we're going to delineate and define metrics for family-centered care so that it can be more clearly understood and then more clearly operationalized consistently. I hope that answers that question.
We're going to have to save this recording. That was a great answer to that question. We should we should keep it. I do think we should move to our family partner panel, just so we have time to hear from each of them. We do have 6 wonderful family members who agreed to be part of the panel today. I'd like to give them each maybe about 2 minutes or so to just kind of introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your experience with the NICU, and then we have 2 specific questions to ask you, and then anything from the audience. I am going to just go by my screen and say your name for you to give your introduction, and then we'll have a more informal answering of the questions. So Molly Wylie, you're the first one I have.
Hey everybody, thanks for being here. My name is Molly Faust-Wylie. I am a NICU parent. My son Max was in the NICU 9 years ago. And I have another son, Renzo, who thankfully was spared a NICU stay. I work as a NICU family program manager at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. And in addition to that, I am the family engagement chair for the NeoQuick Family Engagement Collaborative in Massachusetts right now. And I'm a board advisor at Project Sweet Peas, and I'm on the planning committee of the Gravens Conference. So I love to see so many familiar faces, and I'm so thrilled to be working with all of you. So thank you for being here and for partnering with family caregivers. We're so grateful for all of you.
Thanks, Molly. Necole, McRae, I have you next.
Hi, good afternoon, morning, everyone. I am Necole McRae. I had a 12-year-old in the NICU at Duke University. She was born at 25 weeks, 1 pound, 14 ounces. Currently, I sit on, I am the vice president, of Glow Premise and the executive director of Free to Read Education Recovery Services. I've also done a few conferences with CPQCC, and I see a lot of familiar faces from some of those conferences. So it's good to see everyone.
Thanks, Necole. Katherine Huber.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katherine. I have twin boys who will be 8 on Saturday.
Hello.
They were born at 24 weeks at El Camino Hospital in California. I am on the family advisory board at that NICU and also one of the parent mentors for their Parent Buddy program.
Awesome. Thanks, Katherine. Keira Sorrells.
Hi, I'm Keira Sorrells, and I had triplets who were born at 25 weeks, 5 days. I have 2 survivors that are now 15 years old. My third, Zoe, was in the NICU for 9.5 months and then was rehospitalized and died from a secondary infection when she was just over a year old. I also have a surprise baby who was full term and she's now almost 3. I'm the founder and the executive director of NICU Parent Network, which is a collaborative of community-based NICU family support organizations and small businesses that are all across the United States.
Thank you, Keira. I have Lelis Vernon next.
Yes, hi. I'm Lelis Vernon, and I'm the mother of now 18-year-old twin boys. They were born at 25 weeks, 1 pound 11 with twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. I was the founder of the Family Advisory Council in the NICU where they were born. And later on, I moved to work in quality improvement and research and now clinical guidelines. So I've been doing that for the past 14 years.
Thanks, Lelis. And Marybeth Fry.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marybeth. I am the mother of a former 28-weeker, 2 pounds, 1 ounce, who spent 78 days in the NICU, in which I currently offer family support. I am fortunate to get to interact with all kinds of families here in our unit and offer them support as the NICU Family Care Coordinator in Akron, Ohio. I'm also very fortunate to work with a number of folks on this call through the Vermont Oxford Network as the lead family faculty member of those initiatives for NICQ, NICQ, and EBCD.
Thanks, Marybeth. Thank you all for joining. We do have 2 questions for our panelists, but please feel free to chat in questions that you have as well. And for these, you guys can answer in whatever order you want. This is informal. But our first question was, why do you think family-centered care and partnering with families in the NICU is important? Kind of a broad question, I know.
I would love to speak to that, Colby, if I could just really quickly. I just can't express enough how appreciative I am of Mary's presentation here today. I think she's so eloquently captured every reason why family-centered care is absolutely essential for the baby's best outcome and for the family's best outcome. Just taking the approaches that she was describing and really deliberately counteracting the ramifications of the trauma of a NICU experience for both the family and the baby was just beautifully captured today. So I can't say enough about Mary's presentation. That would be my wholehearted support for why FCC is so, so important.
I'll also add that
I think across the board, you'll find that
No, go ahead, Necole, go ahead.
This is Necole. I was going to say, I think that across the board, when you talk to all of your family partners today, they're going to give you the same answer Marybeth just gave. Like, that presentation was so eloquently captured that there is nothing else that we could say. And if there is something else to add, we really would have to sit and think about it, because everything that I went through, and a lot of us went through in our NICU experiences, was right there on that screen. And we, yep, went through that. Yep, went through that. Oh, I remember that. So I think across the board, we would all agree that the presentation was.
I was just going to add that, and I agree, the presentation is phenomenal and explains why it's necessary. From personally, after I gave birth at 24 weeks, I felt such guilt that I failed the boys, that I was like, now they're in the NICU, they're where they belong, they're with the people who know how to treat them, and they don't need me. And so I was lucky enough to be in a hospital that had a very strong family-centered care plan, who, before I could even verbalize that, said to me, you're going to change diapers, you're going to take the temperature, you're going to feed them, you're going to hold them, they need you. And I needed that to know that, I was supposed to be there and that I could actually help. So I think that's another reason why it's so important that the hospitals have the program in place, is because, at least for me, I would have been much more hands-off without kind of that nudge.
Yeah, I also just want to echo what everyone has said about Mary's presentation, because I think when we hear things like that, no matter sort of where we are from our NICU experience, it's always so important to, sort of hear our NICU experiences and the trauma that, that followed, or, during the stay, to have it validated. Because I think people, it's so important to honor that experience and to prioritize it, because family-centered care really prioritizes our family caregivers. And I think centering that in our practice is such an important piece of that, because it's our lived experience. It's, I often, when I talk about, the NICU, I say a lot of premature babies, they have premature parents, right? So, this was not what we thought was going to be the plan. And, I think a lot of us are in the state, when we talk about, the fear, I think one of the things that I chatted in is we have to meet families where they're at. I certainly know that when, in a family-centered care unit where we were doing so much, I was terrified to touch my 3-pound baby. It was terrifying. I thought I would absolutely break him, and also a lot of our birth parents are going through their own physical trauma and recovering from whiplash. Like, one minute you're pregnant, the next minute you're not, everything changes so suddenly. And so I think honoring and validating those lived experiences and those feelings is such an important piece of this. And I'm so grateful that we're talking about it, because I think, we have to, in order to be able to move forward together as partners.
And I'll just add, the mental health of the parents just cannot be understated. I came into my preemie experience already having gone through the trauma of infertility and what is endured through years of trying to conceive and not being successful, and already having that, at first I thought it was guilt, but it was shame. It was, I am not a good mother. I can't even get pregnant, first of all. Now I can't stay pregnant. Now I don't know my babies. I remember distinctly, I didn't go see my babies for 2 days, because I had I had what I now know is a very common reaction to the trauma of that kind of just dissociating. I had it in my head that I had to have no IVs in order to go to the NICU. Of course, that wasn't true, but that's what I told myself. And I didn't go for 2 days. I remember my husband bringing me photographs of each of the 3 babies, and they were, between 1 pound 4 and 1 pound 10 ounces. And I didn't recognize them. I couldn't tell who was who. I had to look on the back to see which was Lily, which was Avery, which was Zoe, which further told me I was not a good mother, because I didn't even recognize my own children. I then, through the NICU and then the loss of Zoe, it was it was not until I was connected by my OB to a maternal mental health specialist a year and a half after Zoe died. So this is 3.5 years after, being in the NICU, 6.5 years after the beginning of my fertility treatments, did I finally start getting the actual help that I needed that was targeted to my specific conditions. And that was so important. And I wish it had happened when I started fertility treatments. Because my marriage almost fell apart. I don't remember 2 years of my survivors, first couple of years of life, because of the trauma, the post-traumatic stress, the depression, the anxiety. It's so critical that families are supported and that families are really integrated into the care.
I want to thank you all for sharing so much of this too. I can only imagine that it's difficult still maybe to speak about a lot of these experiences. And so truly we're grateful to learn from you and to try and make the experience as better as we can for future parents, but truly thank you for kind of reliving this for us too, in order to teach us where we need to improve. I'm going to ask our second question. So the next thing we wanted to know was, what is one thing that you feel healthcare providers should know or improve upon with respect to family-centered care, if you had to choose one thing?
I'll speak up. Don't underestimate how important your role is in our mental health. Despite all of that I just shared, we had 2 specific nurses and 2 neonatologists that I still am connected with all these years later. And then there was also 2 neonatal occupational therapists. And each of these clinicians, they all acknowledged how unnatural it was to be a parent in the NICU. And they all were very gentle in getting me to be involved, because I was scared. I was scared to love them, because what if they died? And but each one of them, I remember specifically, the first time I held one of my daughters, again, because nobody told me, I thought I had to wait till they were on a nasal cannula to hold them. And one of my kids was on the vent for 14 weeks. But after that first month, one of the nurses said, she said, "Have you held Avery today?" And I was like, "I haven't held Avery ever." And she said, "Oh, well, we're just going to make that happen." And she just did it, and she made it happen. There was, the first time I ever put one of my babies to breast, again, it was like, "Here, this is, what do you think about doing this today?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know if I can do that." But she said, "We can do it. We're going to do it together." And it was just this guidance and this coaching. Same thing with OT and learning infant massage and why it was important. And that I do it with my full-term 3-year-old still, but just the importance of that relationship building with the parents. What you say, how you say it, connecting with us. I always just try, when I'm speaking to clinicians, I just always tell them to think about your own experiences as a patient yourself, or if you have a loved one who's been a patient, how do you want that interaction to be? It's the same for us.
So if I had to share something with clinicians, it would be that family-centered care is not necessarily an isolated process within the NICU. So it's not one intervention that you can do in the NICU as a clinician, and therefore you're going to get family-centeredness in your unit. It's actually a culture of care. And so it's a little more sophisticated than just roping the families as partners in care or in hands-on care processes, or developing measures in your NICU, or having a family advisory council, or having a family partner as part of your quality improvement team, or having a family sitting in leadership roles. It is actually all of the above. And so what we have experienced in quality improvement and families working in quality improvement in the NICU is that many times, as many things in healthcare, things are done in silos. But actually family-centered care, to really claim to have a culture of care that is patient and family-centered, all those processes need to be in place, from leadership to the family at the bedside. Of course, no restrictions to have the family at the bedside at all times, hands-on care, measures, asking, the voice of the consumer, the step one for any quality improvement cycle, right? So it's all of the above. So I'll invite everybody, all clinicians, to explore ways to design a culture of care that is truly inclusive and not just one process at a time.
And I'll sort of piggyback on what Lily said, because I absolutely agree with everything that she said. And I think that one of the things that we find a lot of time when we involve parents and give them an opportunity and family caregivers to give feedback is a lot of the times that things that are a priority to us and to families coming in and out of the NICU are things that, not necessarily things that clinicians or our NICU staff think that they want or need. And they can be really small things like, a coat hook, or make sure that I get the sticker on the door. That means my baby can be cuddled, or, whatever the thing may be. But I think that oftentimes, we're checking off lists and we're making sure that things are done, but giving parents a voice and knowing that things change over time. And so always looping them back in, involving them in ongoing feedback is so important, because we know that oftentimes, what we think that they need is very different than what they want, and what they want in that moment, right? Because the way that we give them information can change, and how people digest information can change. And so we need to be really mindful of that, because everyone's in trauma.
This is Marybeth, and I'll piggyback on all the wonderful things that my colleagues have already said. I don't think I can emphasize enough how much culture means to families. This may sound really kind of hokey, but honestly, but most of our units are locked, right? So, when I'm talking to brand new nursing staff and we talk about all the barriers that families have to get past in order to even get to their child. So from parking in the garage, let's back up, from coming from home, experiencing construction, parking in the parking garage, walking all the way to get to the unit. Now you have to go past the greeter. Now you have to go into the locked unit. You have to have permission to come in to see your baby. If you're in a single patient room, or even if you're in a pod, you have to go past all this staff who may or may not even acknowledge that you've walked in the door. And then you approach your isolette, which is another barrier, because we've got to temperature regulate and keep infection out. So here now we have our baby in a box. So it is so important to truly just to be kind. Acknowledge the family walked in the door. Good morning. What is your plan for your baby today? Take the pressure off of them having to come to you to say, can I kangaroo care my baby today? Offer it right out of the gate. Ask them, what is their pumping schedule for today? When, have you had a chance to take a shower? When are you going to eat? Help them plan their day and ensure that the care schedule that, with all the assessments and things like that also includes the family's desires and wishes to be present with their baby, to nurse their baby, to kangaroo their baby, to pump. It's just such an idea of being supportive holistically of the baby and the family.
I think those are really, really useful answers for us. We've had some great things in the chat as well. I know Keira brought up the importance of peer-to-peer support and having families know that they're not the first to have gone through this experience, and something that they can get through, and kind of what to expect, which I think is an excellent point. And I love this idea of a parent badge. Malika, I know you put in the chat. That's a great idea, so they don't have to wait.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I was on mute because the construction is happening. Can you guys hear me well now?
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, so we are closed unit. So we actually use the parent badges, and so we gave it to them. It's only open, works in the garage, so they can get into the women's hospital garage, and it comes to the NICU door. So it's not anywhere else. It's only 2 places they can have access. We had several difficulties implementing that. So who's going to give out that badges, and how do we collect those badges, and what if we lose the badges, and all those questions that came up when we presented to the security. And finally, we used our unit clerk, the administrative support. So they actually have a tally. They actually write their parents' name and then what badges they gave. If they forgot to return that, then we can deactivate the badge. It's not a big deal. And so that's how we started utilizing the badges for the past year. But now we are under the construction, so it's just not happening. We are on a hold. But I think new unit, we are going to re-implement that. Yeah, so that's a great way of just giving them access to the NICU, so they don't have to stand on the line for the security to get the clearance every time they come to the NICU. So it's just a baby help them. Yeah.
I see Molly commented that they have sibling badges as well, which is amazing. I don't know how many units here are allowing siblings in. I feel like that's probably a very difficult thing for families to not be able to have siblings interact while babies especially have a long NICU stay. I know that right now we are not letting siblings in my unit. Is anyone currently allowing that?
This is Molly. We just started allowing siblings 5 and over back into our unit. And previously, I believe we were allowing siblings 12 and over. So we have some restrictions, but yeah, we've just allowed it, and we're so grateful for it.
We had started, and then COVID hit, and we stopped. And then we restarted, and now we're moving into a stop because of the rise in our particular area. I do have a question for the parents. I've always been struck by the fact that there are little things that we do in the NICU that we don't think about because we're focused on ventilators and IVs and TPNs and everything else. And I'm wondering if there are certain things that parents see and feel really emotional about. I bring this up because I've been in a couple of units before I joined this one in Hershey. And literally at the end of my first week as an attending here, I had parents come up to me and thank me for using their kid's first name. Now, see, I'd been taught from residency and fellowship in the mid 80s, you always just call the child by their first name. But I don't know that I really appreciated the impact that had on parents. Are there things that we do as neonatologists that have a big impact that we probably don't really appreciate?
Can I grab this one? Absolutely. Simply asking how my day was, or having a conversation with me that has nothing to do with the NICU or babies or monitors or beeping meant the world to me. Sharing things about yourself, personal or not, just anything that got away from what I was currently in and the trauma that I was currently experiencing was a big help to me. The things that you say, how you say it, when you say it, definitely matters. And they're so small and minute. They're just like, how did that help? How, like, you wonder how does that help me? But it really does when you take a step back. See, and you don't notice it as a parent until you're outside of the trauma. So once you've sat down and your kid is like 6, 7, 8, 9, and you yourself have actually had the time to process that trauma, you think back on those little things, those conversations, just, hey, would you like a water? That meant the world and kept me from breaking down crying because my world was crashing around me. So yes, absolutely. There are little things that definitely help and change the tide of how we feel in the day, how we feel about the situation we're in.
I think that just speaks to kind of, again, kind of in a way normalizing a very abnormal situation. So, I mean, just like Necole said, just the simple conversation, the way that you would connect, or again, just think about any other situation where you yourself have been a patient and what you appreciated in a really excellent physician or a nurse. What is it that they did? And, anytime I think about those nurses and doctors and therapists, either that took care of my kids or took care of me at any point, it was just being treated like a human being, and being treated not as someone that was just kind of standing by, asking me how I thought my kids were doing. That was always huge because at first I was really tentative, but then they would acknowledge what I said and maybe expand on it. So it was like they were teaching me how to observe my kids, and understand just in conversation with me. And so I would, again, it's just being like Mary was talking about, the connectedness that we all need. And it's the same that we need from you as well.
I also, sort of similar to that, I think one of the things that I really appreciated about some of the team that cared for my son were they very kindly asked me who was helping support me and wanted to know they didn't make any assumptions that, I had family nearby. My family was far away. My son was born in a blizzard. Like, it was me and my husband. That was it. And I really appreciated that they asked questions in a way that didn't make me feel like I was alone, even though I definitely was very isolated and coming off of 6 weeks of bed rest. I think that, I think it was very helpful for my team to understand who my supports were and then sort of check in. My father had to come in and he was in a wheelchair, and they were very accommodating about, getting him to see my son in his isolette, even though the space was really small. And those are the types of things where I feel like they were really helping to take care of me and my family and understand my situation as well, which I think was really important.
I also want to just say, taking the time to explain what some of what might be common knowledge to the neonatologist, to the parents, like when the boys had ROP and they needed to get Avastin shots, and the eye doctor was there, he talked to us, and then he ran out, and I was clearly, visibly upset. And one of the neonatologists who knew me came over with a piece of paper and sat down and started drawing things out and said, "This is what it means. This is what's going to happen. What are your questions?" And she sat down with me and we went through it all, and it just made me feel so much better to just talk it out with someone. And that just can't be, that the importance of that is just, it's key, just in us being able to process things.
I feel like this is one of the reasons that, and I could be wrong here, but I feel like families tend to form a really strong bond with bedside nursing in general. Not that they don't form attachments with other individuals in the NICU, but I feel like bedside nursing, they're winning the race with that one, if there was one. And I think part of it is just because neonatal nurses are fantastic human beings, but also there is a culture of them sitting as part of their daytime routine during feeds or during care or during diaper changes, and having a personal connection with families that can be sometimes difficult for other staff members. And I wonder, I'm speaking as a neonatologist, I have certain families that I've had a really great connection with, and I have certain families that I just don't feel like we've had the time together to establish that. And I think that some of these things you guys are mentioning are really helpful, because they aren't all things that take a huge amount of the day, because honestly, sometimes we can't spend, 45 minutes with every single patient every day and their family. But I think these sound like things that would be very achievable for anyone on the medical team to start practicing, and to, across all of the layers of care, try to make sure that we're showing support for families and having that relationship develop with them. So this is helpful for me, certainly. I know we're coming close to the end of time. Do we have other questions and comments, please?
The only other thing that I was going to just mention, because I'm not sure anyone on the panel has brought it up, but I think it's especially important now to ask family caregivers how they want to be referred to, and check pronouns. And we see all different types of families in the NICU, and I think it's so important to just make sure that we're not making any assumptions about any family and any family lived experience. And so just really making sure that we're careful around that, because it will really help to build trust, because when you have a baby in the NICU, it's so important that you have that mutual understanding.
Dr. Palmer, your hand's up. I don't know if you had a comment. Oh, you're muted. You're muted, sir.
No, I just left it up there because I'm
Okay.
old and not that savvy with my computer. Zoom, you think after 2 years of lecturing, to have it down.
I know Necole has hers up too.
Oh, well, Necole, you talk.
So I wanted to very quickly piggyback on a question that was asked to Mary and her response to that, when it came to how do we get very frightened parents to hold their children in the NICU, and the suggestions that came about with that. So when we were asked the two questions for the panel, I really went back and started thinking about my NICU experience. And one of the things that made me laugh was at my discharge, the doctors and the nurses were asking me questions that made me feel as if they didn't think that I had any support leaving the hospital, which was really funny, because at the time I was married and wore my ring every day. And, yeah, I have a whole family, a whole husband over here. And, but they still didn't realize that I was married the entire year we stayed in the NICU, which led me to question why they didn't know. Well, called my ex-husband, and he said, well, to be honest with you, I only visited the NICU like 8 times the entire time our daughter was there. Which, wow, okay, why? And he said, I was so scared to even step into the hospital. So if we can catch the trauma, especially when it comes to men, the fathers, like the moms, yes, we're scared, but eventually we will. But dads, like those are the ones that are, I'll stand by, but I don't want to touch, or I'll watch, but I don't want to learn how to swaddle. If we can catch the trauma there, or at least have mental health professionals there that will be able to recognize that there is some trauma there, and you don't even want to step into the hospital and you need some support, that right there would be key for men, for the fathers of NICU families, to be able to be available to their families, because it's one thing for your body to be there, and it's another for your emotions, your heart, your mind, and everything to be in it. So that was my 2 cents.
I'll add that somebody mentioned here the Florida Perinatal Quality Committee, and I'm part of that. And actually, we did some qualitative feedback from families, a qualitative study with NICU families, and we did a thematic analysis of 3 months of conversations, and the portion about dads was just unbelievable. It was even shocking for me as a NICU mom to hear the NICU dad perspective, which is totally different from moms. And this is perhaps because of this maternal infant care mom baby diet that is at the center perhaps of all this birthing experience. But I think it's so unfair that we forget the dads, because they're part of the baby's family. So if you want, you can explore the Florida PQC website. I believe it's our findings is published there. And if not, we really need to redesign new activities and ways to rope the dads, because forget about the trauma of moms and all the guilt and everything that we go through. They go through a whole other package of emotions and new deals in their lives. So I'm a huge fan of dads in the NICU. There is some material out there printed, but really not much. So yeah, I encourage everybody to really pay attention to the dads.
This was actually a big piece of the QI work that we did with Marybeth and the Vaughn team for our experience-based co-design. We interviewed families and different sets of caregivers about their NICU admission experiences and what we learned and what we saw. And even like it led me to have a conversation with my husband about our NICU admission. And I learned that, I had always thought that he had gone with Max when Max was admitted, but he stayed with me, which I don't remember because I was totally, under. So it really brought to light that, the takeaway for two different parents who lived the same experience and were part of the same experience, they remembered such wildly different details and also recalled such different information. And I think that was such an eye opener for all of us when we were doing these interviews with the families, because we just, we think of them as being, they're, whether they're partners or whatever their family makeup may be, they have a baby or babies in the care and they go together in some way. But, I think oftentimes we see the non-birthing caregivers, 6 months down the line, a year out, when things finally start to feel okay, that's when things fall apart for a lot of them. And I think, we don't have there's no feedback mechanism for that. We don't have an opportunity. There's NICU grad programs and things like that. But I think we need to be really mindful of the different experiences of the different caregivers and how it plays out.
I love the idea in the chat of showing a dad giving kangaroo care. That's something we're actually working on getting put up in our NICU, because we are the only non-Florida hospital that is associated with the FPQC Parent Initiative that Lelis was talking about. 4-star way in after moving from Florida to New York. But one of the struggles we still have is dads thinking that they shouldn't do kangaroo care, that's a thing for moms. And that's something that I don't know that we always even think about addressing right away. We just start noticing that the dads aren't the ones holding. And so I think just that visual being present in the NICU would be really helpful. We're in our last few minutes. I don't know if we want to share our last slide, if you still have those up. We have quite a few webinars that are upcoming. As we mentioned before, we'll have information going out about those again. The next one is going to be July 14th. And that is our webinar that will be about the importance of providing family-centered care in the NICU and how to do so. We do have a red cap survey that has been thrown in the chat a couple of times. I'll put it in again here. It's very brief. We would love to get some feedback from you guys on how this session has gone, how you would like to see it improved. And then very importantly, there's 2 questions on there of if you would like to get involved with the task force itself, meaning getting access to these recorded webinars and access to our newsletter. And then if you want to be even more involved as one of our small group cohorts that are working together in groups of about 5 or 6 units to specifically try to improve family-centered care. There's a space for you to put your email in that will be sent to us to contact you. And I really want to just thank everyone again. I know Mary had to jump off early, but I think we can even thank her in her absence for an absolutely wonderful talk. And then thank you to our family partners as well for sharing their stories and giving us such fantastic information. The chat has been, I've had a hard time keeping up with all of it. We've had such good information in it. We'll definitely go through that and send out a summary of these ideas and resources as well. So thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Of course.
Thank you, everyone.